Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you are staying dry and finding things to do in this particularly rainy weather, not getting too stir crazy being cooped up in the house. I do have one of our favorite mindful practices today, the bells. So those of you that have done the bells with me before, I know that you love this. Those of you that hadn't, allow me to explain for a moment. To start, I will ask you to close your eyes or just put your head down. And then I will ring the bells a series of times. And each time I'm going to ask you to just hold on to that sound as long as possible. You'll hear that the sound is going to appear and then disappear on its own, and you want to hang on to it till it fully disappears. Now in class, I ask you to raise your hand when you no longer hear any sound. I'm still going to ask you to do that even though I can't see you, just because that keeps with our routine. And it also gives us an action to complete at the end of this. So you want to make sure that you're really focused on it so that you know when to raise your hand. And the purpose of the bells is to not only clear our head and allow us to just focus on that sound, but it's also to help our focus and our attention span in general. So our brain is used to working on several things at once, and in this activity, we're just asking our brain to just do one thing and just listen for the sound of the bells. So it does really help us with our focus and our attention that we can then apply to other things like our schoolwork or maybe a sport that we're trying to do better in or become more competitive. So certainly use this activity anytime you like. You'll have this little clip now that you can go back to whenever you need a little help with focus. So now I do ask you to close your eyes or put your head down. Take a moment to bring the attention to your breath, just inhaling deeply through your nose, exhaling deeply through your mouth. Giving yourself the opportunity to just clear your head and listen to the sound of the bells, hanging on to the sound as long as possible. Okay, hands down. Hands down. Hands down. Hands down. We'll do one more. And hands down. So as I said, it's a little bit different when I can't see you, so I hope I didn't cut any of you off if you were still hearing the sound of the chime. I was trying to give ourselves enough time so that everyone would have gotten to that point already, but if I didn't, I apologize. And just know that this is a great activity for just not only calming yourself down and letting go of things that are going on in your head, but again, like I said, improving your focus, improving your attention span. And with that in mind, let's focus on Chapter 13, Perfidy Unlimited. Together, the three mice traveled down, down, down. The thread around Despereaux's neck was tight. He felt as if it were choking him. He tugged at it with one paw. "Don't touch the thread," the second hood said. "Yeah," echoed the first hood. "Don't touch the thread." They moved quickly, and whenever Despereaux slowed, one of the two hoods poked him in the shoulder and told him to keep moving. They went through holes in the wall and down golden stairs. They went past rooms with doors that were closed and doors that were flung wide. The three mice traveled across marble floors and under heavy velvet drapes. They moved through warm patches of sunlight and dark spools of shade. This, thought Despereaux, was the world he was leaving behind. The world that he knew and loved, and somewhere in it the Princess P was laughing and smiling and clapping her hands to music. Unaware of Despereaux's fate. That he would not be able to let the princess know what had become of him seemed suddenly unbearable to the mouse. Would it be possible for me to have a last word with the princess? Despereaux asked. A word? Said the second hood. You want a word with a human? I want to tell her what has happened to me. Geez, said the first hood. He stopped and stamped a paw on the floor in frustration. Cripes, you can't learn, can you? The voice was terribly familiar to Despereaux. Furlough? He said. What? Said the first hood irritably. Despereaux shuddered. His own brother was delivering him to the dungeon. His heart stopped beating and shrunk to a small, cold, disbelieving pebble. But then, just as quickly, it leapt alive again, beating with hope. Furlough, Despereaux said, and he took one of his brother's paws in his own. Please let me go. Please, I'm your brother. Furlough rolled his eyes. He took his paw out of Despereaux's. No, he said. No way. Please, said Despereaux. No, said Furlough. Rules are rules. Reader, do you recall that word perfidy? As our story progresses, perfidy becomes an even more appropriate word, doesn't it? Perfidy was certainly the word that was in Despereaux's mind as the mice finally approached the narrow, steep stairs that led to the black hole of the dungeon. They stood, the 3 mice, 2 with hoods and 1 without, and contemplated the abyss before them. And then Furlough stood up on his hind legs and placed his right paw over his heart. For the good of the castle mice, he announced to the darkness, we deliver this day to the dungeon a mouse in need of punishment. He is, according to the laws we have established, wearing the red thread of death. The red thread of death, repeated Despereaux in a small voice. Wearing the red thread of death. What a terrible phrase. But this mouse didn't have long to consider its implications, because he was suddenly pushed from behind by the hooded mice. The push was a strong one, and it sent Despereaux flying down the stairs into the dungeon. As he tumbled, whisker over tail, through the darkness, there were only 2 words in his mind. One was perfidy, and the other word that he clung to was P. Perfidy, P. Perfidy, P. These were the words that pinwheeled through Despereaux's mind as his body descended into the darkness. Chapter 14. Darkness. Despereaux lay on his back at the bottom of the steps and touched the bones in his body one by one. They were all there. And amazingly, they were unbroken. He got to his feet and became aware of a terrible, foul, extremely insulting smell. The dungeon reader stank. It stank of despair, of suffering, of hopelessness, which is to say that the dungeon smelled of rats. And it was so dark, Despereaux had never before encountered darkness so awful, so all-encompassing. The darkness had a physical presence, as if it were a being all its own. The mouse held one small paw up in front of his whiskers. He could not see it, and he had the truly alarming thought that perhaps he, Despereaux Tilling, did not even exist. Oh my, he said aloud. His voice echoed in the smelly darkness. Perfidy, said Despereaux, just to hear his voice again, just to assure himself that he did exist. P, said Despereaux, and the name of his beloved was immediately swallowed up by the darkness. He shivered, he shook, he sneezed, his teeth chattered, he longed for his handkerchief, he grabbed hold of his tail. It took him a long, frightening moment to even locate his tail, so absolute was the darkness. To have something, anything, to hold on to, he considered fainting. He deemed it the only reasonable response to the situation in which he found himself. But then he remembered the words of the threadmaster: honor, courtesy, devotion, and bravery. I will be brave, thought Despereaux. I will try to be brave like a knight in shining armor. I will be brave for the Princess P. How best for him to be brave? He cleared his throat. He let go of his tail. He stood up straighter. Once upon a time, he said out loud to the darkness. He said these words because they were the best, the most powerful words that he knew. And just saying them comforted him. Once upon a time, he said again, feeling a tiny bit braver, there was a knight, and he wore always an armor of shining silver. Once upon a time, boomed a voice from the darkness. A knight in shining armor? What does a mouse know of such things? That voice, the loudest voice that Despereaux had ever heard, could only be, he assumed, belong to the world's largest rat. Despereaux's small, overworked heart stopped beating, and for the second time that day, the mouse fainted. And that is where we will leave Despereaux. We will pick up with chapter 15 tomorrow, and I hope you guys enjoyed our mindful practice today, and please use it anytime. Really use any of the mindful practices we've done anytime. You can always go back and listen or watch them again, and I will see you guys tomorrow.